Hi, Dorothea Hendricks here, your communication coach in presentation skills and the art of speaking. Today, just a short story on asking good questions. In 1944, Isidore Rabi won the Nobel Prize in Physics. At that time, an interviewer asked him, he said, Dr. Rabi, how is it that instead of becoming a doctor, a lawyer, a businessman, like all the other immigrant kids in your neighborhood, you became a scientist? Dr. Rabi said, well, although she didn't intend to, it was my mother that made me do it. All the other mothers, when their kids came home from school, the mothers would ask them, and so what did you learn today? But not my mother. My mother would say, Izzy, what good question did you ask today? And it was asking good questions that led me to becoming a scientist. Asking good questions. So, what is a good question? We all ask questions, but like everything else, there are good questions and questions that basically you want to throw away and not bother with. So, good questions. Good questions are clear, they're easy to understand, they have a sense of purpose, they evoke a certain amount of curiosity, and they get our mental wheels turning. They get us to think. So for us to ask good questions, that's what we need to be looking at, evoking curiosity, getting people to think. But for most of us, and that includes me, like most of us, what is it that we do? We use the declarative, the statement. In English, there are four basic types of sentences. The declarative, which is the statement, I'm telling you. The command, sit down, eat your lunch, go to bed. The exclamatory, watch out, car coming. And then we have the interrogative, which is the question. For most of us, though, what do we use the most? Do we toss out a lot of questions, or do we use the statement? I'm telling you, I'm telling you, I'm telling you. For most of us that have sat through many staff meetings, or we've been to certain conventions and conferences, or sometimes on the receiving end of somebody at a networking event, often what's happened is we've heard blah, 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 telling. And then sometimes we in turn have done the same. This whole video here is not to say that we shouldn't tell or use statements, but it's to get us to think about asking questions more, asking good questions. Because what questions do, for example, how do you see that working? If you ask somebody in the workplace, how do you see that working? Versus, well, I see that should work this way. One does engagement when you ask the question, it evokes a certain amount of curiosity. And the other one, basically, you're on the receiving end of somebody telling you something. Questions are powerful. Author David Hoffeld, in his book, Want to Know What Your Brain Does When It Hears a Good Question, indeed says questions are powerful. And not only does hearing a question affect what the brain does in that instant, that question can also affect our future behavior. Asking good questions are a principal persuasion strategy and a principle that's important in the workplace. I'd like to wrap it up right now with a quote by Neil Postman that says, everything we know has its root in questions, has its origins in questions. So if you're not in the habit of asking questions or don't know how many questions you should ask, maybe start keeping track. Start thinking about tossing some questions into your everyday conversations now. Until next week on YouTube, this is Dorothea Hendricks saying, wishing you mountains of success.